There are moments in history when the universe itself holds its breath, when the weight of a single choice becomes so absolute that reality bends beneath it. Eren Yeager stood at the center of such a moment, commanding an army of colossal titans that stretched beyond the horizon, each footstep a seismic declaration of his will. The rumbling had begun. Millions would die. Civilizations would crumble to dust. And Eren, encased within the skeletal cathedral of the founding titan, felt nothing but the cold certainty of his purpose. He had seen the future. He had walked through memories that were not his own, touching the lives of ancestors and descendants alike, understanding that the cycle of hatred would never end unless he ended it first. Freedom demanded a price written in blood and ash, and Eren had already signed his name in both. His friends screamed his name from distant shores. The world called him devil, monster, god. He accepted every title because none of them mattered anymore. Only the result mattered. Only freedom mattered. But the universe has rules older than human ambition. The founding titan's power was never meant to reach beyond the walls of its world, never meant to command the fabric of existence itself. As Eren pushed further, demanding that reality itself bow to his will, something fundamental began to fracture. Space folded inward. Time stuttered like a dying heartbeat. The connection between paths and the physical world, that invisible thread that bound all Eldians across history, suddenly snapped. The rupture was soundless and deafening all at once. Eren felt himself torn from the founding titan's body, pulled through dimensions that human consciousness was never designed to perceive. His mind, which had touched eternity through Ymir's power, now touched something infinitely worse. He fell through colors that had no names, through spaces between thoughts, through the screaming void that existed in the cracks of creation. And then, with brutal finality, he was cast into the warp.
De Materium.
The Sea of Souls. Humanity's collective nightmare given infinite form. Eren's consciousness reformed in that impossible realm, and for the first time since he kissed Astoria's hand and saw the future, he felt something he thought he had burned away.
Fear.
Not fear of death, not fear of failure, but the fear of absolute insignificance. In his world, Eren had been the culmination of 2,000 years of suffering. He held the power of the founding titan, the attack titan, and the Warhammer titan. He commanded millions. He was the devil who would save his people by destroying their enemies.
He was the end of history itself.
But here, in this howling madness of impossible geometry and screaming colors, he was nothing.
Less than nothing.
A single drop of mortal will in an ocean of eternal madness. The warp does not sleep.
It does not rest.
It is hunger and desire and rage and despair given infinite expression. Shapes moved in the distance, things too large to be called creatures. Their forms shifting between past and future, their existence a violation of every natural law. Eren saw worlds burning in the reflection of eyes that were also mouths that were also stars. He heard laughter that was also weeping, that was also the death screams of species he would never know.
Time meant nothing here. Space was a lie.
Cause and effect were suggestions that reality occasionally remembered to follow. And yet, even here, even stripped of his titan form and cast into literal hell, Eren Yeager did not break. He had made his choice. He had looked into the eyes of the woman he loved and lied about his hatred.
He had murdered innocent children in Liberio.
He had betrayed everyone who ever trusted him. He had become exactly what the world feared most.
Not because he was insane. Not because he was evil.
But because he had decided that freedom, true freedom, was worth any price. The warp sensed this. The great powers that ruled this realm of madness turned their attention toward the newest soul cast into their domain. They felt his resolve like a burning brand, tasted the blood already on his hands, measured the weight of his choices against the fabric of morality itself. Here was a soul that had already damned itself. Here was a will that had looked into the abyss and jumped willingly. Here was something rare and precious and terrible. Here was a weapon waiting to be claimed. But Eren Yeager had already chosen his hell. And even gods would soon learn what that choice truly meant. The boy who sought freedom had become the devil who delivered it. Now, cast into a universe where even gods were expendable, where war was worship and suffering was prayer, Eren would discover if his will was truly unbreakable. Or if the 41st millennium would finally teach him what true despair looked like. The warp churned. Reality trembled.
And in the distance, demons began to smile.
They came for him like sharks drawn to blood and water. Demons of every allegiance, every twisted desire given form and hunger. Lesser entities at first, testing this new soul cast into their realm, trying to understand what manner of being could carry such weight of sin without already belonging to one of the great powers. Eren felt them circling, felt their claws brushing against the edges of his consciousness, and he understood with cold clarity that he was being hunted. But Eren Yeager had been hunted before.
By Marley.
By the world.
By his own friends.
He had walked willingly into every trap because he had already seen how the story ended.
The future was fixed.
His choices were inevitable. And nothing, not even literal demons, would make him regret what he had already decided to become. The first true tempter arrived wrapped in brass and rage. A demon of corn, the blood god, towering and terrible, its form shifting between warrior and weapon, between beast and slaughter-given flesh. It spoke in a voice like grinding bones and promised Eren everything he had already taken. Endless war. Infinite conflict. The strength to crush every enemy beneath his heel.
No more doubt.
No more hesitation. Only the purity of battle and the honesty of blood. Join Khorne, and his rage would become divine.
His violence would become holy.
His genocide would become glorious. Eren looked at the demon and saw exactly what it was offering.
An excuse. A justification.
A way to pretend that his choices were not his own, that some greater power had guided his hand. The blood god offered to make his sins virtuous, to transform his mass murder into worship. And in doing so would steal the only thing Eren had left. His responsibility. His guilt. His choice. He refused.
Not with words, with silence.
With the same cold determination that had carried him through betrayal and blood. The demon howled and lunged, and Eren's will, forged in 2,000 years of inherited trauma, met it like a wall of absolute denial. The creature recoiled, confused by prey that would not break. Then came Sinchi's whispers, sliding through his thoughts like silk wrapped around broken glass. The architect of fate promised him something far more seductive than rage. Understanding. The demon showed him timelines branching into infinity, possibilities beyond counting, futures where his friends lived and parodies survived without the rumbling. It promised him the power to change what he had seen, to alter destiny itself, to become more than a slave to predetermined fate. All he had to do was accept that his future was not fixed,
that his certainty was a lie,
that he could still choose differently.
And that was exactly why Eren refused.
Because he had already walked through every possibility in the paths. He had seen every branch, every choice, every outcome. And in all of them, only one road led to his people's freedom. Sinch offered him hope as a poison, a way to second-guess himself into paralysis. Eren had already killed hope. He had murdered it the day he chose the rumbling. There was no going back. Not because he could not, but because he would not. The demon of change retreated, its infinite eyes reflecting something it rarely encountered. A mortal who had already accepted his own damnation so completely that even the Lord of Change could not offer him an alternative path.
Slaanesh came last, and its temptation was the cruelest.
It did not promise power or knowledge.
It promised relief.
An end to the crushing weight of his choices. The demon wore familiar faces, spoke in beloved voices, offered him exactly what he had surrendered the moment he kissed Historia's hand and saw the future. Freedom from consequence. Freedom from guilt. Freedom from the knowledge of what he had become. Join the Prince of Pleasure, and all the pain would become ecstasy. All the horror would become beautiful. All the genocide would become a masterpiece of sensation, and he would finally be free from the burden of remembering what he had done. Eren listened to every word. Let the demon show him visions of peace without cost, of freedom without sacrifice, of a world where he could be the hero he pretended to be instead of the devil he chose to become. And then, with the same terrible resolve that had defined every step of his path, he rejected it completely. Because Eren Yeager did not want to forget, did not want the pain to disappear, did not want to be free from the weight of his sins. He had chosen to become a monster so that his friends could be heroes. He had chosen to bear the hatred of the world so that parodies could survive. He had chosen damnation with open eyes and full knowledge, and he would not, could not, let anyone steal that choice from him.
Not his friend.
Not his enemies. Not even gods. The demons retreated, and the great powers of chaos turned their full attention to this impossible soul. A mortal who carried the weight of millions of deaths. A killer who refused to be absolved. A sinner who would not repent. A soul already steeped in blood who somehow remained uncorrupted because his corruption was entirely his own. For the first time in 10,000 years, the chaos gods felt something close to uncertainty.
This was not a champion. This was not a servant.
This was a walking apocalypse who answered to no one, who had already chosen his hell, who wore his damnation like armor.
Eren Yeager had rejected their gifts.
But he had also proven something far more dangerous. He was aligned with destruction on his own terms. And soon the galaxy would learn what that truly meant. The planet had no name that mattered anymore. It had been Tertius 7 once, an agri-world that fed 3 sectors, home to 17 billion souls who knew nothing of war beyond propaganda and prayer. Then chaos came. A Black Legion warband led by a demon prince who promised that suffering could be beautiful if you simply stopped resisting. The skies turned red. The crops grew teeth. Children sang hymns in languages that made their parents weep blood. And the Imperium, in its infinite mercy, sent the Imperial Guard to die so that at least some of the grain shipments might still arrive on schedule. Captain Marcos had been fighting for 6 months in what used to be a cathedral, and was now a monument to screaming architecture. His regiment had lost 3/4 of its strength holding a single city block.
Commissars executed deserters every hour.
Priests promised that dying here was the Emperor's will. Nobody believed them anymore. Marcos had stopped praying 3 weeks ago when he watched a cultist tear through his squad using nothing but belief and madness. Prayer did not stop bullets.
Faith did not heal Lasgun's burns.
And the Emperor, wherever he was, had clearly stopped listening to this worthless rock.
Then the sky broke, not metaphorically,
not gradually. One moment there was smoke and the red haze of eternal warfare. The next, reality simply tore itself apart. A rift opened above the battlefield, and through it fell something that made the demon prince look up from its slaughter and pause.
Marco saw it from his trench. Every guardsman still alive saw it. The cultists saw it.
The demon saw it. And every living being on that cursed world felt the exact same thing. Awe, mixed with horror, mixed with the terrible understanding that what was arriving was not salvation. It was something worse. The founding titan emerged into the material realm with the weight of inevitability. Eren's consciousness, sharpened by the warp and refined by rejection of every god who tried to claim him, pulled his form from memory and will. The skeletal colossus that had once marched across his world now manifested on this one. A cathedral of bone and flesh and absolute determination towering over the battlefield like judgment incarnate. Its ribs were pillars that scraped the clouds. Its spine was a road that stretched toward heaven. And its face, that terrible skull crowned in rage, looked down upon the war zone with empty sockets that somehow still conveyed perfect understanding. The founding titan took a single step. The shock wave killed 300 cultists instantly. Buildings that had survived 6 months of warfare crumbled like sandcastles. Imperial and chaos lines simply ceased to exist, replaced by a crater the size of a city district. Marcos clung to the walls of his trench as the earth itself betrayed physics, watching in numb terror as something impossible made itself real through sheer force of will. The demon prince recovered first. It was ancient, had fought for millennia, had slaughtered space marines and laughed at Imperial knights. It saw this new arrival and felt only rage at the interruption. With a howl that shattered windows across the city, it launched itself toward the founding Titan, wreathed in warp flame and impossible speed, fully intending to tear this newcomer apart and feast on whatever strange soul piloted such a monstrosity. Eren did not speak, did not roar, did not announce himself. He simply raised one massive skeletal hand and closed it around the demon prince mid-flight. The creature that had tortured this world for half a year, that had broken Imperial battle lines and corrupted entire regiments, suddenly found itself held like an insect. It thrashed, burned, screamed words of power that could unmake reality. Eren squeezed. The demon prince exploded into essence and madness, banished back to the warp with such force that the psychic shockwave knocked every psyker on the planet unconscious.
Silence. Perfect, terrible silence.
Then the founding Titan moved again. It walked through the chaos lines like a farmer through wheat. Each step obliterated hundreds. Cultists tried to run and were crushed. Demons tried to fight and were swept aside like dust. Vehicles, bunkers, defensive positions that had held against 6 months of Imperial assault simply ceased to exist. Eren was not fighting. He was erasing, removing obstacles with the same cold efficiency he had shown in his own world.
No rage,
No pleasure,
no hesitation.
just the absolute certainty of a path chosen and followed to its end. The Imperial Guard watched in stunned silence as their 6-month nightmare ended in 6 minutes. Marco saw cultists fleeing toward his position, not attacking but running in pure terror from the thing that stalked them. He watched the founding Titan reach down and simply sweep entire blocks clean, clearing chaos corruption like a man brushing away cobwebs. He watched reality itself seem to bend around this impossible colossus, as if the universe was not quite sure how to process what was happening. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The founding Titan stood in the center of the devastated city, surrounded by the corpses of 100,000 chaos worshippers, and was perfectly still. Eren, deep within that skeletal form, felt the familiar weight of genocide settle on his shoulders.
Another world, another slaughter.
Another moment where he became exactly what everyone feared. He had saved this city by destroying a third of it. He had rescued these soldiers by showing them horrors they would never forget. The Imperium would call this a miracle. They would praise the Emperor's intervention. They would build cathedrals on mass graves and call it holy. But Eren knew better. He had not come to save anyone. He had simply arrived, found war, and ended it the only way he knew how. Through overwhelming absolute destruction. Marcos watched as Imperial aircraft began circling the founding Titan, as Vox channels exploded with panicked reports, as officers tried to understand what had just happened. He looked up at that skeletal face, those empty eye sockets, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. Because for just a moment, he thought he saw something in those hollow spaces.
Not a god, not a demon, but a man.
A tired, sad, absolutely resolute man who had chosen to become a monster. And that, Marcos realized, was somehow worse than any demon. Because demons were evil. But this thing, this walking apocalypse that had just saved them, was not evil. It was decided. And there was nothing in the galaxy more terrifying than that. The Inquisition arrived within 3 days. They always did when reality misbehaved. Inquisitor Cassia Vorgan of the Ordo Malleus had fought demons for 40 years, had closed warp rifts with nothing but faith and fury, had stared into the eyes of greater demons and pronounced judgment without flinching. She had seen every form of corruption the galaxy could produce. But when her ship entered orbit around Tertius 7 and her psychers tried to analyze the entity still standing in the ruined city, every single one of them began to scream.
Not in pain.
In recognition. In horror at what they saw when they touched that mind. Vorgan had to physically sedate 3 of them. The 4th, an old man who had served her for 20 years, simply looked at her with tears streaming down his face and whispered that they should leave.
Immediately.
Before it noticed them. Before it decided they were enemies. Before they learned what true inevitability looked like. Vorgan ignored him. Fear was the mind killer, and she had killed her fear decades ago. She descended to the surface with a full retinue of stormtroopers, 3 Astartes from a nearby chapter on loan, and enough firepower to level a city block. She expected to find a demon prince in disguise. Or a new chaos abomination. Or perhaps a rogue psyker who had somehow tapped into powers beyond mortal kin. What she found instead was far worse. Eren had released the founding Titan form. He stood in the center of the devastation wearing the face he had worn in life, looking exactly like what he was. A young man, barely 20, with tired eyes and the weight of infinite choices pressing down on his shoulders. He did not run, did not hide, did not attack. He simply waited as the Inquisition surrounded him, weapons raised, servo skulls recording every breath, as if he had expected this moment and accepted it with the same cold resignation that defined everything else about him. Vorgan studied him for a long moment. She had developed an instinct for corruption over 4 decades of hunting it. Chaos left marks.
Taint could be sensed.
Heresy had a smell. This young man had none of those signs. And somehow that made him infinitely more dangerous. She signaled her sanctioned psyker. A woman whose skull was covered in purity seals and whose eyes had been replaced with augmetic sensors designed to see the warp itself. The psyker reached out with her mind, the gentlest touch, barely a whisper of psychic contact, and immediately collapsed, blood pouring from her nose, her augmetics sparking and dying. Vorgan caught her before she hit the ground, and the psyker grabbed her arm with desperate strength. She spoke in a voice raw with terror and awe. She had seen his memory, seen the rumbling, seen the world crushed beneath endless feet, seen a boy who had murdered millions not out of madness or corruption but out of cold, calculated choice. Seen a mind that had touched eternity and come away unchanged because he had already decided what he would become. He was not insane. He was decided. And that was so much worse. Vorgan looked back at Eren and understood why her psykers had screamed. Because this was not a demon wearing human skin. This was a human who had become something demons feared. A mortal who had achieved what chaos could only promise.
Absolute conviction.
Total certainty. The willingness to bear any sin if it meant protecting what he loved. The ecclesiarchy arrived next, as they always did when the Inquisition found something that challenged imperial doctrine. Preachers and priests, wrapped in faith and fury, ready to pronounce judgment on this new entity. They called him heresy incarnate,
A false god.
an abomination that dared to manifest power without bowing to the emperor's will. They demanded he kneel, demanded he repent, demanded he acknowledge that all power came from the golden throne and that any who claimed otherwise was tainted beyond redemption. Eren listened to every word.
Let them preach. Let them threaten.
Let them promise damnation and death. And then he spoke for the first time since arriving in this universe. His voice was quiet,
Calm.
the voice of a man who had already argued with himself 1,000 times and won every debate. He told them he would not kneel. Not to their emperor.
Not to their gods.
Not to their Imperium. He had already bowed to fate itself and found it wanting. He had already served powers greater than any in this galaxy and rejected them all. He was not a hero.
Not a savior.
Not even a villain seeking power. He was simply a man who had chosen freedom, true freedom, and paid its price in blood and ash. And no empire, no matter how vast, would make him regret that choice. The priests called for his immediate execution. The Astartes raised their bolters. Vorgan herself drew her plasma pistol, knowing that what came next would define whether this world lived or burned. And Eren simply stood there, waiting, with the same tired patience of a man who had already seen how this ended.
But he did not transform. Did not attack.
Did not unleash the apocalypse he carried within him. Because despite everything, despite the monster he had become, Eren Yeager still remembered who he was supposed to protect. These people, these soldiers and civilians, and even these fanatics trying to kill him, they were not his enemies. They were simply caught in another war they did not choose. Just like the people of his world. Just like everyone who ever died beneath feet that walked toward freedom. Vorgan saw that hesitation, saw the humanity still buried beneath the weight of genocide, and made a decision that would haunt her until her death. She lowered her weapon,
Ordered her forces to stand down.
declared that this entity, whatever it was, had saved an imperial world from chaos corruption and would be monitored but not executed.
The priests screamed heresy.
The Astartes questioned her authority, but inquisitorial authority was absolute. And Vorgan had just gambled the entire sector on the tired eyes of a young man who had become a god and hated himself for it. Eren nodded once. A gesture of acknowledgement between two people who understood the weight of impossible choices. Then he walked away, through imperial lines, past weapons that could kill him, past faith that condemned him, and disappeared into the ruins of the city he had saved by destroying.
The Imperium watched him go.
And for the first time in 10,000 years, they felt something they had almost forgotten. Uncertainty. Word spread through the warp like blood through water. A new power had manifested in the material realm. Something that had rejected the dark gods and survived. Something that killed demons without prayer or psychic power, using nothing but will made manifest. The chaos warbands that infested the sector, sensing weakness in the imperial response, decided to test this new entity. They would learn what true defiance looked like. They would teach this upstart mortal that rejecting chaos meant accepting oblivion. They could not have been more wrong. The first warband to find Eren was a World Eater's contingent, 2,000 Khorne berserkers who had been murdering their way across the sector for 3 years. They found him on a dead world, standing alone in a field of ash, as if waiting for them. Their champion, a demon prince who had once been a captain of the warhounds, looked at this solitary figure and laughed. The blood god had blessed them with eternal rage. They were beyond death, beyond pain, beyond anything this weakling could possibly threaten them with. Eren looked up at the Chaos Space Marines descending on him from all sides, and felt nothing but tired familiarity.
He had fought soldiers before, had killed children,
had crushed armies beneath feet that shook the world. These warriors, for all their rage and power, were just more obstacles. More people who thought violence made them strong. More fools who believed that choosing destruction was the same as being destruction. He would teach them the difference. The founding titan manifested in seconds, ripping itself from memory and will with the ease of long practice. But this time, Eren did not stop at one form. He had learned something in the warp, had understood that his power was not limited to what he remembered from his world. The founding titan could command all titans across time. And in this universe, time was a suggestion. Colossal titans erupted from the ground around him.
dozens, hundreds.
An army of burning giants that should not exist in this reality, but did, because Eren willed it so. The World Eaters charged anyway, because Khorne's blessing left no room for fear or strategy. They met the wall of titans and were vaporized.
Not killed, not defeated.
Simply erased as if they had never existed. The demon prince roared and flew toward Eren directly, planning to tear the head from this upstart god. The founding titan caught it mid-flight and did not simply crush it. Eren had learned from the demons who had tempted him, had understood that these creatures were will-given form. So he broke that will, unmade the demon's certainty, showed it, through psychic contact it could not escape exactly what Eren had done to his own world. Let it feel the weight of the rumbling. Let it understand that Khorne's rage was childish compared to the cold fury of a man who had already chosen damnation. The demon prince screamed and came apart, not banished but shattered, its essence scattered across the warp in pieces too small to ever reform.
Chaos noted.
The second attack came from a Black Legion fleet, 3 cruisers filled with veterans of the Long War who had fought since the Horus Heresy. They bombarded the world from orbit, turning the surface into molten glass, confident that nothing could survive such devastation. When the smoke cleared, the founding titan was still standing, its skeletal form glowing red from the heat but utterly unbroken. Eren reached up, and for the first time used the Warhammer Titan's power in this new universe. Crystalline structures erupted from the ground, massive spears of hardened material that punched through the void and impaled two of the cruisers. They fell burning from orbit, tens of thousands of traitors screaming as they realized that this enemy could reach them even in space. The third cruiser tried to flee. Eren would not allow it. He manifested the attack titan's future sight, saw where the ship would emerge from the warp, and was waiting. The cruiser translated into real space and found the founding titan standing on an asteroid, one massive hand already reaching out to crush it like an insect. The chaos forces broke. For the first time in 10,000 years, traitors who had fought the Imperium across countless worlds felt something they thought they had abandoned. Terror. Pure, absolute terror of an enemy they could not corrupt, could not kill, could not even comprehend. Eren did not pursue, did not gloat, did not declare victory. He simply continued walking across dead worlds and active battlefields, appearing wherever chaos thought it was strongest, and proving them wrong through overwhelming, absolute force. Cult worlds burned. Places where the dark gods had been worshipped for millennia simply vanished as the founding titan walked across them, erasing heresy not through faith but through the pure physical reality of unstoppable destruction.
Demon princes fell.
Greater demons were banished. Chaos champions who had led crusades for centuries met a boy who had already crushed his own world and found their legends meaningless in comparison. The warp itself began to change in response. In the immaterial realm, the great powers turned their full attention to this impossible thorn. Khorne raged that a mortal dared to kill more efficiently than his chosen. Sinch schemed to find a future where Eren could be controlled. Nurgle offered decay as a gift to one already dead inside. Slaanesh whispered that his pain could be beautiful. All of them were ignored. Eren Yeager had made his choice before any of them noticed his existence. And nothing, not even gods, would make him reconsider. Imperial forces watching from a distance could not process what they were seeing.
This was not an Imperial strike, not a Space Marine crusade.
Not even the fury of the Emperor made manifest. This was a single individual waging a one-person war against the archenemy of mankind and winning. Winning not through faith or technology or ancient pacts, but through sheer, unbending will. Commanders did not know whether to praise him or call for exterminatus on every world he touched. Because Eren did not save these worlds. He cleansed them,
left nothing but ash and silence.
Killed chaos worshippers and imperial citizens caught in the crossfire with the same cold efficiency. He was not a savior. He was a walking apocalypse who happened to be pointed at humanity's enemies. And the Imperium, for all its zealotry and faith, had to confront a terrible question. What do you do when your greatest weapon against chaos is something that terrifies you more than the demons themselves? Eren did not care about their answer. He had stopped caring about judgment the day he chose the rumbling. Chaos had learned what true cataclysm looked like. Now, the Imperium would learn what it meant to have an ally more frightening than their enemies. And across the galaxy, in the throne room of Terra itself, psychic sensors registered a new presence. A soul so heavy with death that it registered as its own gravitational anomaly. The Emperor, entombed and silent, felt it too. And for the first time in 10 millennia, the master of mankind felt something close to recognition. He had met people like Eren before. Heroes who became monsters to save what they loved. And he knew, with the cold certainty of 10,000 years of experience, that this story could only end one way. In fire and ash and the terrible freedom of a universe forced to acknowledge that some choices could never be forgiven.
Only endured.
They sent the Grey Knights first. The demon hunters. The Emperor's gift to a galaxy drowning in chaos. 3 squads, led by Brother Captain Arvan, a veteran of 500 years who had closed warp rifts with his bare hands and banished greater demons through faith alone. They had fought every form of corruption known to the Imperium. They had never lost a battle against the darkness. They were certain this would be no different. They found Eren on a planet called Sanctity's End, a world that had been a shrine to the Emperor for 3,000 years before chaos corrupted it. He had cleansed the world in 7 hours, killing every cultist and demon with mechanical efficiency, and now stood in the ruins of what had been the greatest cathedral on the planet. The Grey Knights deployed in perfect formation, storm bolters raised, Nemesis force weapons humming with psychic power designed to kill anything touched by the warp. Arven spoke first. He declared Eren corrupted by association, tainted by his presence in the warp, dangerous beyond measure despite his apparent service to humanity. The Grey Knights' purpose was absolute. They killed anything touched by chaos, no exceptions, no hesitation. They had executed billions to keep the Imperium pure. One more death, even one as strange as this, was simply duty. Eren looked at the Grey Knights and saw exactly what they were.
Fanatics.
True believers who had never questioned whether their absolute certainty might be just another form of chains. They were slaves to the Emperor just as surely as his people had been slaves to Marley.
They called it faith.
Eren called it cowardice. The unwillingness to choose your own path, to bear the weight of your own decisions, to live free even if freedom damned you. He told them to leave.
Not a threat. Not a plea. Just a statement of faith.
He had no desire to kill them. They were not his enemies. They were simply more people trapped in a war they thought was righteous, following orders they believed were holy, unable to see that absolute obedience was just another cage. Arven responded by opening fire. Blessed bolter rounds, each one inscribed with prayers and litanies, designed to kill demons with a single shot. They struck Eren dead center and exploded against a hardened crystal shell that materialized from nowhere. The Warhammer Titan's power, used as armor rather than weapon. The Grey Knights charged. They were the finest warriors humanity had ever produced, trained from childhood in arts designed to kill gods. They moved with perfect coordination, each strike calculated to exploit perceived weaknesses, each psychic blast aimed to shatter will and break corruption. They expected resistance. They expected a demon to emerge. They expected chaos to reveal itself.
Instead, they found something worse.
A human being who fought like he had already seen every move they would make. Because Eren had. The attack titan's power let him see the future, multiple futures, branching possibilities. He walked through the Grey Knight's assault like a man navigating a familiar room in the dark, dodged strikes before they were thrown, moved away from psychic blasts before they were unleashed.
Did not attack, did not kill, simply evaded over and over, proving with every motion that their absolute certainty meant nothing against someone who had already lived through this fight 100 times. Arven realized they were fighting something beyond their doctrine. This was not a demon, not a heretic,
not even a psyker drunk on power. This was a man who had somehow achieved what the Emperor himself had once embodied. The will to stand alone against the galaxy and remain unbroken. The captain called for a full assault, channeling every ounce of psychic power his squad possessed into a single, devastating strike designed to banish greater demons back to the warp. The blast struck Eren directly and he did not move.
Did not defend.
Simply stood there and let the psychic fire wash over him, testing whether these warriors could actually harm him.
The power faded. Eren was unmarked, not because he had resisted,
but because there was nothing to corrupt.
No demon to banish.
No chaos to purge. Just a human soul so absolutely convinced of its path that even the Emperor's chosen weapons could not shake it.
Then Eren stopped holding back.
The founding titan manifested, but not fully. Just enough. One skeletal hand, larger than a building, emerged from the ground and swept through the Grey Knight's formation like a man brushing away dust. Power armor crumpled.
Force weapons shattered.
Centuries of training and faith met the simple reality of overwhelming physical force and lost. Arven found himself pinned beneath debris, watching as his squad, his brothers, warriors who had never known defeat, were scattered like toys. Eren knelt beside the captain, still in human form, and spoke quietly.
He told Arven the truth.
That faith was just another chain. that serving a god, any god, even the emperor, was still slavery. That true freedom meant choosing your own damnation and living with the consequences.
He had killed millions, had destroyed his own world, had become exactly what everyone feared.
And he would do it again, every time, because that choice was his and his alone. Arvan looked into Eren's eyes and saw something that broke his certainty for the first time in 500 years.
Not madness, not corruption, but absolute terrible sanity.
The sanity of someone who had counted the cost and paid it anyway. Who had weighed his soul against the freedom of others and chosen others. Who had become a devil with full knowledge and zero regret. The Grey Knight had fought demons who reveled in evil.
This was worse.
This was a man who committed atrocities while fully understanding they were atrocities, and did not ask for forgiveness because he knew he did not deserve it. Eren stood and walked away, leaving the Grey Knights alive but broken. Not in body, but in certainty. They had met something their doctrine had no answer for. A human being more terrifying than any demon because his choices were entirely his own.
Arvan would report this encounter to his chapter.
The report would make its way to Titan, to the heart of the Grey Knight's fortress. And the Grand Masters would read it and feel something they had not felt since their founding.
Doubt. Not about their purpose,
but about whether their purpose was enough. Whether faith could truly stand against someone who had abandoned faith entirely and found something stronger in its place. The terrible freedom of a soul that answered to no one.
Not even itself.
Inquisitor Lord Constantine was 270 years old and had authorized exterminatus 16 times in his career. Each time, the weight of those billions of deaths had added another line to his face, another sleepless night to his memory.
But he had never hesitated.
Because the Imperium's greatest weapon was also its most necessary. Sometimes, entire worlds had to die so that the galaxy could live. It was not mercy.
It was not justice. It was mathematics written in ash and bone.
Now, staring at the tactical display showing 7 worlds in the Sanctus sector, he prepared to authorize exterminatus for the 17th time. Except this time felt different. These worlds had been touched by chaos, yes. Corrupted by a word-bearer's crusade that had spread heresy like a plague. By every measure of imperial doctrine, they needed to be cleansed with fire and virus bombs and cyclonic torpedoes.
Billions would die.
It was necessary. It was inevitable. Except Eren Yeager had reached the sector first. Constantine watched through orbital surveillance as the founding Titan walked across the first world. Watched as chaos strongholds that had taken decades to build simply vanished. Watched as cultist armies numbering in the millions were crushed beneath feet that fell with seismic force. Watched as a single individual accomplished in hours what would have taken the Imperial Guard months and millions of casualties.
The second world. The third.
Each one cleansed of chaos corruption through overwhelming destruction.
Eren did not discriminate.
Did not carefully separate innocent from guilty. He simply walked, and everything in his path ceased to exist. Cities burned.
Populations died.
By the time he finished, each world was scoured clean of chaos taint. Also clean of most life. The dead numbered in the billions.
Constantine had authorized genocide.
Eren had simply committed it. The Inquisitor Lord stared at the reports and felt something crack in his certainty. Because this was exterminatus. This was the Imperium's ultimate sanction, the final solution, the weapon of last resort. Except it was not a weapon anymore. It was a person. A young man who carried the weight of exterminatus in his soul and deployed it with the casual efficiency of someone who had already made peace with damnation. The Ordo Malleus convened an emergency conclave. 70 Inquisitors, representing the Imperium's finest demon hunters, gathered on Constantine's flagship to decide what to do about an entity that had made their ultimate weapon redundant.
Arguments raged for 3 days.
Some called for Eren's immediate execution, claiming that anything powerful enough to rival exterminatus was too dangerous to exist. Others argued for recruitment, for binding him to the Imperium's will through oaths and pacts. A few, very few, suggested leaving him alone and praying he remained pointed at the Imperium's enemies. Constantine listened to every argument and realized they were all missing the point.
Eren Yeager was not a weapon waiting to be wielded.
He was not a demon to be banished. He was not even a threat to be neutralized. He was a fact, a fundamental law of this new reality.
Like gravity, like entropy.
Like the Emperor himself, you did not control facts. You adapted to them or you broke against them. On the fourth world, Constantine descended to the surface personally. Found Eren standing in the ruins of what had been a hive city of 8 billion souls.
Now it was ash and silent.
The founding Titan had walked here, and nothing remained but the memory of screaming. Constantine, who had authorized the deaths of trillions over his career, looked at this wasteland and felt something he had not felt in a century.
Disgust.
Not at the death. He was far too old for that.
But at the efficiency. At how easy it had been.
At how one person had accomplished what required the Imperium's full military might and made it look trivial. He asked Eren the question that had been burning in his mind since the first reports arrived. Did he feel anything? Did the weight of billions of deaths mean anything to a mind that could commit them so casually? Was there any humanity left in someone who had become a walking exterminatus? Eren answered honestly.
Yes.
He felt every death, carried every scream, remembered every face even though he had never seen most of them. The weight was crushing, unbearable, infinite, and he would bear it anyway because that was the price he had agreed to pay.
He had not become numb to genocide.
He had simply decided that some things were worth becoming a monster for.
Freedom.
The survival of his people. The right to choose your own fate even if that fate was damnation. These were not excuses.
They were reasons. And reasons did not erase guilt.
They just made it meaningful. Constantine listened and understood why every psyker who touched Eren's mind came away traumatized. Because they expected to find madness or corruption or the gleeful malice of chaos. Instead, they found sanity.
Perfect, terrible sanity.
The sanity of someone who had chosen to become evil and made that choice while completely understanding what it meant. The Inquisitor Lord returned to his ship and made his recommendation. The Ordo Malleus should monitor Eren Yeager but not engage him. Should track his movements but not interfere. Should document everything he did but not try to stop him. Because attempting to kill him would cost more lives than letting him continue. Because binding him would require a level of control the Imperium no longer possessed. And because, most importantly, he was already doing exactly what Exterminatus was designed to do.
Cleanse the galaxy of chaos corruption.
One dead world at a time. The recommendation was not accepted easily. Inquisitors built their entire careers on the principle that the Imperium controlled all ultimate sanctions. That the power of life and death over entire worlds belonged to the Emperor's chosen and no one else.
Eren Yeager's existence challenged that principle.
Proved that ultimate power could exist outside Imperial control. Proved that one individual could embody Exterminatus and walk free. Proved that the Imperium's greatest weapon was not unique. And that terrified them more than any demon ever could. Because demons could be fought with faith.
Heretics could be purged with fire.
Xenos could be exterminated with guns. But what did you do when your greatest weapon looked back at you with tired eyes and simply walked away? When the incarnation of your final solution refused to serve, refused to obey, refused to die? When Exterminatus itself became a person who rejected every authority and answered only to his own terrible conscience. Constantine filed his report and authorized Exterminatus on the remaining 3 worlds in the sector. Not because Eren had not already cleansed them, but because the Imperium needed to prove, if only to itself, that it still controlled this power. That it could still choose to end worlds. That Exterminatus belonged to them and not to a tired young man who had already killed more people than most Inquisitors would ever see. The virus bombs fell. The worlds burned. And Eren, watching from a neighboring system, understood exactly what the display meant. The Imperium was not trying to fight him. They were trying to remain relevant. trying to prove they still mattered in a galaxy that had just learned ultimate weapons could walk on two legs and choose their own targets.
He felt no satisfaction, no triumph,
just the familiar weight of understanding. He had not freed his people by destroying the Titans.
He had not changed anything fundamental. He had simply become what he destroyed.
And now in this new galaxy, history was repeating with different names and the same terrible pattern. Freedom and control locked in eternal war, with countless innocents crushed between them. Eren Yeager had escaped one cage only to find himself in a larger one. But unlike the Imperium, unlike chaos, unlike every power in this dark millennium, he would never stop trying to break free.
Even if freedom burned the galaxy.
Even if the cost was his own humanity. Even if the price was paid in the ashes of dead worlds and the screams of the forgotten.
Because that was the choice he had made.
And nothing, not even the revelation of its futility, would make him regret it. There are places in the galaxy where reality is more suggestion than law. Where the warp bleeds into real space and demons walk openly under skies that scream in colors without names. These are the Eye of Terror's edge worlds, places so saturated with chaos that even the Imperium has abandoned them, writing off entire systems as lost. Here, the dark gods are not abstract threats. They are present. Their will shapes physics and their attention breaks minds. Eren walked into these hells deliberately.
Not because he was summoned.
Not because he sought to prove anything. But because chaos warbands kept emerging from these regions, kept attacking imperial worlds, kept spreading corruption. And if he was going to stop them, he needed to cut the rod at its source. Even if that meant marching into the heart of the enemy's power and challenging gods who had existed since before humanity learned to dream. The first world he entered had been a demon world for 3,000 years. Its surface was living flesh that screamed when you walked on it. Its sky was filled with eyes that wept blood. Demon princes ruled from keeps made of bone and suffering. When the founding Titan manifested here, reality itself rebelled against his presence. The warp tried to unmake him. Physics became negotiable. Gravity reversed. Time ran backwards and forwards simultaneously. Eren ignored it all, pushed through impossible geometry through sheer force of will. The attack Titan's power let him see through the illusions. The Warhammer Titan's power let him create structures that obeyed his laws instead of the warp's madness. And the founding Titan, that avatar of absolute will, simply declared that he would exist here regardless of what reality preferred. Demons swarmed him by the thousands. Lesser entities at first, then greater demons, then demon princes who had led crusades against the Imperium for millennia. They died. Not easily.
Not without cost.
Eren felt every wound, even though his Titan body could regenerate. Felt the warp trying to seep into his mind, to corrupt him retroactively, to make him believe he had always served chaos. But Eren had walked through the paths, had seen every timeline, every possibility, every version of himself across history. The warp's tricks were nothing compared to the weight of absolute knowledge. He had already seen himself become a monster, already accepted it, already made peace with damnation. Chaos could not corrupt what had already chosen its own hell. The demon princes broke against him like waves against stone. Their immortality meant nothing against someone who could erase them so completely that even the warp forgot they existed. Their power, drawn from 10,000 years of worship and slaughter, meant nothing against will refined in 2,000 years of inherited trauma. They were gods. Eren was a man who had killed God and taken its power. The difference was absolute. Then the true gods noticed.
Not their demon servants, not their mortal champions,
but the actual dark gods themselves, the vast intelligences that existed beyond the material realm, the hungering forces that had nearly destroyed the galaxy and still might. Khorne turned his gaze fully upon Eren, and entire sectors felt the blood god's rage. Sinch examined this anomaly with 1,000 eyes, calculating futures where Eren could be bent to purpose. Nurgle offered embrace to one already drowning in despair.
Slaanesh whispered that his pain was exquisite and could be so much more.
Eren stood at the center of their combined attention and did not break.
Because he had already done this, already faced temptation,
Already rejected every offer, every threat, every promise. The dark gods were powerful beyond mortal comprehension.
but they were still trying to control him, still trying to chain him, still trying to make him serve.
And Eren Yeager had spent his entire existence fighting chains.
Marley's chain, his father's chains, fate's chains.
He would not accept new ones simply because they were worn by gods. He could not kill them. He understood that immediately. The dark gods were not beings that could die.
They were concepts,
Fundamental forces of consciousness given form. Killing them would require killing every emotion they embodied.
rage, hope, despair,
Desire.
all the things that made existence meaningful.
He could not end them. But he could do something worse. He could prove they did not control him. Could demonstrate that a mortal will, sufficiently resolute, could exist in their realm and remain unchanged. Could walk through their kingdoms and reject their gifts with every breath.
So he did.
Eren marched through demon worlds like a man walking through a storm. Let the chaos gods throw everything at him. Let them tempt and threaten and promise and damn. He endured it all with the same cold determination that had defined every step since he kissed Astoria's hand.
Worlds burned in his way.
Not claimed for the Imperium. Not purified. Just empty. Scoured clean of chaos corruption through the simple expedient of killing everything that lived there. The Chaos Crusades faltering. Warbands that had been preparing to assault Imperial space found their staging grounds turned to ash. Demon princes who had led armies for centuries were banished so violently that their names were erased from the great game. Cult worlds that had worshipped the dark gods for millennia simply vanished from star charts, leaving only dead rocks where civilizations had been.
Eren was not winning.
The warp was infinite. Chaos was eternal. But he was proving something that sent ripples through the Imperium itself. He could not be controlled. The dark gods, for all their power, could not bend his will,
Could not corrupt his purpose.
could not make him serve. They had tempted heroes and broken saints and seduced champions across 10,000 years. But Eren Yeager was not a hero, was not a saint.
Was not a champion.
He was simply a man who had already decided what he would become and accepted every consequence. Fear of damnation meant nothing to someone already damned. Promises of power meant nothing to someone who had already held the power to destroy worlds. Hope meant nothing to someone who had killed hope to achieve freedom. And slowly, across the galaxy, something shifted. The Imperium, watching through long-range augurs and psychic scrying, saw Chaos Crusades collapse without Imperial intervention. Saw demon worlds go silent. Saw warbands flee from regions they had controlled for centuries. And they understood, with a mixture of relief and horror, that Eren Yeager had done what the Emperor himself had tried and failed to achieve. He had wounded chaos. Not destroyed it. Not defeated it. But wounded it.
Proven that it was not inevitable.
That a sufficiently resolute will could exist in proximity to the dark gods and remain free. The wound was not physical.
It was conceptual.
A crack in the certainty that chaos always corrupted, always consumed, always won. Eren had become living proof that the dark gods could be defied. And that proof, that single example, was more dangerous to chaos than any army. Because ideas were what fed the warp. And Eren Yeager had just introduced a new idea to the galaxy. That freedom was possible even in hell. That will could overcome gods. That one person, fully committed to their choice, could reshape reality itself.
It was not a happy idea.
Not a hopeful one. Eren's path was paved with genocide and soaked in innocent blood. But it was real. And reality, even terrible reality, was more powerful than any demon's lie. The dark gods recoiled.
Not in defeat.
They could not be defeated.
But in recognition.
They had encountered this before in the ancient past. A will so absolute that it could not be bent. The Emperor had possessed it once, before age and entropy wore him down. Now, in the dying light of the 41st millennium, it had manifested again. In a young man who had become a devil to save what he loved. In a monster who remembered his humanity even as he drowned in his own atrocities. The warp would remember Eren Yeager, not as a champion, not as an enemy, but as a warning that some souls once decided could not be claimed. Not by chaos, not by order, not by anyone. And across the galaxy, in the darkest corners of the Imperium, people would whisper a new prayer. Not to the Emperor, but to the idea that even in eternal war, even in absolute despair, freedom was still possible. If you were willing to become what everyone feared to achieve it. In the end, Eren Yeager refused every offer. The Imperium tried to recruit him, offering authority and resources if he would serve the Golden Throne.
He declined without hesitation.
Chaos tried to corrupt him, offering power beyond measure if he would simply accept their gifts. He refused with the same cold certainty he had shown from the beginning. Rogue traders tried to hire him. Planetary governors tried to bargain with him. Even Xeno's factions, hearing whispers of a new power in the galaxy, sent emissaries to negotiate. Eren listened to every proposition and rejected them all. Because accepting any of them would mean surrendering the one thing he had killed for, died for, damned himself for. His freedom. The right to choose his own path without master or leash. He had not destroyed his world just to become a servant in another. Had not rejected the chaos gods just to bow to an emperor. Had not walked through hell to emerge in someone else's heaven. So he wandered. A solitary apocalypse moving through the galaxy without purpose beyond his own survival and his own terrible conscience. He appeared on battlefields where the fighting had dragged on for decades, where neither side could win and countless lives were being spent for nothing. He did not choose sides, did not declare allegiances. He simply ended the wars. Through overwhelming destruction. Through genocides that made both armies irrelevant. Through the cold mathematics of a man who had already decided that some conflicts could only be resolved through annihilation. The Imperium called him a monster. Chaos cursed his name. Imperial citizens who were saved by his intervention whispered prayers of gratitude mixed with terror. Survivors of his cleansings woke screaming from nightmares of skeletal giants and burning worlds. He was not a hero. Never pretended to be. He was simply what he had always been. A man who chose to become a devil so others could be free. The only difference was scale. In his world, he had freed one island at the cost of the world. Here, he freed worlds at the cost of his own humanity. Eren knew he would never find peace. Knew that redemption was not possible for someone who had committed genocide multiple times across 2 universes. Knew that his existence was a wound in reality itself, a walking reminder that freedom's price could be measured in billions of corpses. But he had never sought peace, had never wanted redemption. From the moment he saw the future through his father's memories, he had accepted that his path led only one direction. Down, into darkness, into damnation, into the absolute freedom of a soul that answered to no one and nothing. And in a universe defined by eternal war, where the Imperium ground trillions into dust for the crime of existing, where chaos corrupted everything it touched, where Xeno's empires viewed humanity as resources to be harvested, Eren Yeager's existence became something unexpected. Not a symbol of hope, but a reminder that resistance was still possible. That even in the darkest timeline, even in a galaxy where gods walked and armies numbered in the billions, a single individual could still matter if they were willing to pay the price. He was a cautionary tale. A warning written in ash and bone. This is what freedom looks like when you strip away every comfortable lie. This is what it costs to truly be unchained. This is the devil you must become if you refuse to serve. And yet, despite the horror, despite the genocide, despite everything he represented, people across the galaxy found themselves drawn to that idea. Not to worship him, not to follow him, but to understand that freedom was still possible even here, even at the end of the galaxy, even in the 41st millennium where there was only war. The Imperium would continue its eternal crusade. Chaos would continue its eternal corruption. Xenos would continue their eternal expansion. And Eren Yeager would continue his eternal walk, appearing wherever war became meaningless slaughter, ending conflicts through annihilation, refusing every crown and rejecting every chain.
He was not salvation.
He was not hope. He was simply proof that even in hell, a human being could still choose their own damnation. And that choice, that terrible freedom, was the only victory he had ever sought. The galaxy would remember him not as a hero or a villain, but as something more disturbing. As the man who proved that absolute freedom and absolute monstrosity were not opposites.
They were the same thing.
Different words for the same terrible truth. That to be truly free meant accepting responsibility for every consequence. Meant becoming exactly what everyone feared. Meant walking alone through eternity, carrying the weight of choices no one else could bear.
Eren Yeager had achieved his freedom,
had proven his will was unbreakable, had demonstrated that even gods could not control a sufficiently resolute soul. And the cost of that achievement was written across dead worlds and silent systems, in the ashes of billions and the screams of the forgotten.
He had won,
had secured the one thing he wanted more than life or redemption or peace.
His freedom, absolute,
total, infinite, and utterly, completely, unbearably lonely. But that was acceptable.
Because loneliness was still freedom.
And freedom, no matter how dark, was still the only thing worth fighting for.
Even at the end of the galaxy.
Even in eternal war. Even when the price was your own soul and the souls of everyone who ever trusted you.
Freedom. That was the answer.
That was always the answer. And Eren Yeager, the devil of parodies who became the wandering apocalypse of the 41st millennium, would carry that answer until the stars themselves went dark.